There's a specific kind of content that I watch all the time, and it's a risky content because this kind of content is other people showing the kind of tools they use. And I watch it across different kind of categories. I watch it for data, but on data it doesn't really happen so often. I think most of the time I watch this for productivity tools, which is even more dangerous because with every tool you believe that you found the tool that will now make everything better, which is not. And so this is like the important disclaimer, which comes in 5 seconds. Okay, welcome back. I'm Timo. I'm the founder of Deep Sky Data. We are a data consultancy who is focused on great data collection setups. And here comes the disclaimer. So every time you watch a video where someone shows their tools they use every day, and maybe I will show quite a bunch today, then there's the risk that you believe, and I do this all the time, that a tool makes something better. And usually it does something better unless you wouldn't use a tool. But a tool never solves your problem. So if you have process problems, goal problems, or whatever it's like, so a tool will not solve these things. So and another thing is like starting to use a tool takes time. So you have to master it in some degree to really get the full value out of it that it should generate. And so what I do today, I show you my current data stack, like the version for August 2020. And so maybe I don't know when I make an update for that. Let's see when it really makes sense, maybe in 4 months or so. And I broke the different tools I use into 3 categories. One is like essential. So these are the ones that I usually work with. And work with is really more focusing on when I design, let's say, the setups and mostly the setups by myself. So when I can influence it a lot. And so sometimes when I work in specific client setups, there the setup is pretty established and it doesn't really make sense to introduce something new. And then, of course, I work with something different as well. And I know these also pretty well. So, for example, you will not find Google Analytics on this list because like I personally will not use it. But I work on setups where they use it. And so I know the tool. If I would be, let's say, have this list like my kind of projects and also like the different kind of client projects I'm doing, then GA, for example, would be maybe on essential, but it's getting less. So let's see. So this is important. So I have essential, basically route to essential or way to essential. So it's like I already use it pretty often, but it's not really like something that I would claim essential. And so I'll explain why. And then like a category testing. And then maybe in the end, I show quickly what I have in my backlog for next up testing. So that's it. And so I give a little bit of context, how I use it, what are the use cases, why I use it, at least for the essential ones. And for essential ones, for example, what can challenge the status of essential. And for the not yet essential ones, basically, what is currently missing to not make it essential for me. And so I hope this gives you some ideas, a little bit of context of things that you can try out. And this is important, just try it out. This is like you also should have something like testing, and so it can move up. And so this is what I mean with mastery. So the more better like you get in the tools, they fit for you. Of course, like you master them, and then at some point they can become essential tools. All right, enough talking. Let's showcase. Essential. First start. So I excluded already Google Analytics, but I have Google Tag Manager in here. And so why do I have it? Because it's basically part of every setup that I'm working on. I'm just thinking maybe there are 1, 2 where Google Tag Manager is not a part. So why I like it? First of all, it's a central place where I can place all the different kind of front-end scripts. So in case you just use the front-end one, or maybe like also server-side tags where I send data to advertisement platforms. And I like this central place. I don't want to have this spread around in different kind of places where I send data to marketing platforms, because this is the second one. It's like I want to have a central place to handle all my consent. So I want to be sure that, so either I do it very restrictively to load GTM only when I have consent, so this is a possibility as well. Then I'm really sure that any kind of stuff that is in GTM only loads with consent, or in most of the cases I load GTM as an additional script and then basically check the constant status, and then based on the content status, just fire the different kind of tags. But the good thing is, because everything is centralized, I can just run it within this. And so this is why I use it. Also, like, I mean, I can work blindly in this kind of tool. So I do this for 5-6 years. I will not know, of course, I don't know any kind of edge cases. I don't have Seymour Harvard levels of knowledge in this kind of tool, but I would say I'm dangerous enough to do a lot of things in these kind of thing. And it's also like, it's often like part of setups that I usually work with. So like, it's rarely a case that someone has a setup where they don't use GTM. And so what can challenge the status of GTM? I mean, GTM definitely has a problem with scalability and operationalize it. So at least in big setups, it's really problematic. So at the moment, I'm working on some kind of solutions for that, but built on top of GTM. Anything else that can challenge GTM? I would still look for a, let's say, developer-driven tag management system, or maybe headless tag manager system that I can just run with config files and CLIs. I guess if something like this comes around, I might ditch GTM pretty quickly, at least like for my projects. But right now, there's nothing around. All right, next one, segment. The good old segment. I mean, I started to use segment when they brought out Analytics.js, their open source JavaScript library. That was, I don't know, it was basically like the same thing like dbt was when it came out. So it was really like the tool for the time. So it was really the problem that the same problem with Tag Manager. Like we were sending the same data to different kind of platforms. We were implementing it 6 or 7 times. And so with Analytics.js, it was really easy because you implement it one time and you just define where you want to send data. And so this is still what Segment does. But Segment for me is basically like the collection layer. So I like setups where I have one collection layer where data comes in. And this collection layer should be pretty flexible. So it can receive data from, of course, front ends, but it can also receive data from different kind of backend systems. And the third one, and this is something where I really like Segment, I can, for example, just pipe webhook data into it. And so in Segment, I can create a source function and just receive the webhook data, transform it into a segment, track event, identify event, whatever, and just pass it on to the destination system. And so I use this all the time in different kind of setups. So for example, often in combination with HubSpot. So HubSpot sends the webhook into Segment, we transfer it into proper events, and then the data gets passed on. Super cool. And what I really like about Segment is like it just works. So it's I never really had serious issues with these kind of systems. I mean, yes, of course they can have edge cases. I had edge cases, but like the stuff that should work works, and this is always great. And so it's still like also like for me like the easiest and best way to get events into a database. So like the pipeline to just get events into a database, I think it's still the simplest system. You sometimes should not forget is like Segment always gets integrated. So wherever you look, so I don't know, a new tool comes around that's popping one data to one side to another, or like for example, software as a service subscription reporting tools, they all integrate with Segment data, because Segment is basically often like the usual standard where people collect like event data. And so you can really be sure if there's integrations into event data, Segment is usually on the list. And so don't underestimate this. This can help you a lot down the road. Challenge for Segment, always the same challenge. It's the pricing. So of course, like you pay extra for this collection layer, and with Segment you pay a lot if you really have high volume. And I know so whenever I talk with people about Segment, no one is really unhappy with the product. Everyone is unhappy with the money they are paying. And this might be because sometimes like it's hard to understand the value. But of course, like it adds another layer, and so it's not a cheap layer. And so pricing is always like the challenge. Amplitude. It's not like that I work a lot with Amplitude, but I end up to work a lot with Amplitude in client setup. Well, it's not true. A lot of people use Mixpanel at the now. But if I would choose it personally, I would still go with Amplitude for some So like the use cases are usually like, okay, classic growth and product analytics. And for me, mostly like funnels and cohorts. And so, I mean, I can do crazy funnels and crazy cohort analysis with Amplitude. This works really great. And it works like this for, I don't know, 5-8 years. And so I do it for 5 to 8 years. So I know it pretty well how to do it. And then also like it has a very extensive free plan. So you can live a long life in the free plan. And when you're really super sure that this is the right tool for you, you can just move on. And I think they found the right combination of how many events they enable in the free plan and what kind of features you get in the free plan to really test out. So you really get the core features. And I think when you really master the core features, then you're ready for the next one. I think then it makes sense that you pay. That you pay more, and like the whole tool is super solid, so it works. I mean, of course, like they are not so fancy looking, like for example Mixpanel. So Mixpanel did a lot like to improve their charts and so on. So just based on design, I would always go for Mixpanel, but Mixpanel always have these little flunky flaws that drives me crazy, and so and Amplitude usually doesn't have. So it's that's nice. What can challenge it? For me, always the question, do I really need this as an extra tool? So for me, it's always the question, because I work a lot on getting data into some kind of database. And so for me, it's like the question, do I really need something like Amplitude extra on the side to do things? In most of the setups that I work on, yes, because to provide all these things with a custom model takes too long, but I'm definitely working on ways to maybe not needing this tool anymore. Or if there's like a product analytics tool which is really good, man, there were some who tried to do it, but they were not really, didn't have the depth that I need. So if there might be something, then and for a price range that is okay. So for example, I know that Indicative, for example, can do this, but it's just, I think it's just possible on the enterprise plan to use your data warehouse for it. And so not an option for me. If there's something come around with like the pricing model of Amplitude and can do the same stuff on my data warehouse data, I don't think about Amplitude anymore. All right, Google Cloud Platform. It's also like, I think cloud platforms are really a case where you invest your time. So when I still did software projects, I invested a lot of time in AWS. So I still have a very good AWS background, mostly around the software related services like DynamoDB, EC2, SQS, and so on. So this stuff I still know pretty good, but like when it comes to data, I invest a lot of time into GCP, and this was mostly because of BigQuery. And so this is the stuff that I still do on GCP. It's like I use BigQuery, I use Google Storage, and now I start to use workflows because I thought, okay, why should I use something like Airflow? I mean, there's also like an Airflow-like thing, but I think it's quite expensive. So why should I use these when I can just also use something native? And so I started to play around a little bit with Google Workflows, and it works pretty well. So needs a bit of time to get into the configuration, but once it's done, it's a really like super serverless state engine that you can run. And so I think I will use it a lot more in these very single GCP platform projects. And I really love Cloud Run. So to just build a quick Python application, basically put it in a Flask application, put a Docker around, and just push it into Cloud Run, and it runs. So I mean, I did it now really often. So of course, like I don't have these let's say time costs that you usually have when you start out with this. So I get an application up and running in 2 to 3 hours, the first version, and this is really great, and it works really great. I really like Cloud Run, so more than the classic Lambda functions and so on, because like of course, like because of the Dockerized thing, I can, let's say, I can use more things that I usually use and don't really have to abstract. I mean, I did a lot of stuff with AWS Lambda in the past, and so I still like the product a lot, but like Cloud Run basically has replaced that for me. So what can replace GCP? We come to this in the testing thing. So I would like to have more automation and more, let's say, a metadata layer, at least for all the data things. So I have to build this at the moment a lot myself. And like if there's a platform like we come in one that I'm currently testing that gives me this stuff out of the box, so like interconnecting all the different kind of parts, giving me a meta layer, make some automation on top, some operations on top, this can get me away from GCP. let's see. But I will show what this basically is. Okay, next one, dbt. I use dbt just as a SQL orchestrator. So I don't do any kind of fancy macro stuff. I don't do any kind of other fancy stuff that you might can do. I don't even read a lot about it. So I just use this to orchestrate my SQL models. And the way I do it usually at the moment is like, because I do all the development locally, and then I just use their cloud thing as a scheduler. So do I need the cloud for a scheduler? No, of course not. I could also build something else. At the moment, it's just opportunity driven because I haven't found the time to set up a proper pipeline, basically, maybe, for example, on GCP with Cloud Build. So if I would sit down for a day and just do this, then I might just use this setup. But since dbt Cloud at least has a free plan that I can use, and so it works for me, and yeah, that's fine. So as I said, so I usually use it for orchestration. I start now to work more with the metadata, so I think I start to see more like the benefits of adding metadata to your different kind of models, and I also start to look more into artifacts to, for example, analyze the runtime of different kind of models and to map the change, which I mean still need different tools to do, but like, okay, I use the data that dbt is basically putting somewhere and I can work on it. So challenge, I work a lot on approaches to make models easier and simpler and leaner. And so if the models really become leaner, I don't really have a need for dbt anymore because the orchestration part is not so hard anymore. So this might replace dbt. And yeah, I guess this is like the major thing that can happen. So when the orchestration need is like, and when, I don't know, for example, if my orchestration need is not super high, then maybe something like Dexter might be better. Or if like dbt is just baked into a different platform, so we come to this later, then of course I might still use dbt, but it's then dbt as a small part in a bigger context. All right, GitHub Codespace. So why do I use it? It's super simple to use. So you basically just start it. So you create a new code space on top of your repository. And why do I use it? Because dbt is still a little bit funky on M1. So I wasted so many hours to get it running. Sometimes I think one time I got it working on my M1, but most of the time I didn't got it working. And I just don't want to waste time anymore unless I see somewhere a post, okay, it works now so seamlessly. I don't really have to care. So what I do is if I have a dbt project, I just spin up a code space. And this works really well in VSCode, so we come to VSCode in a second. And so it's just a click, and especially in VSCode, it just feels if you just work locally. And yeah, and so this is really great. I can also see benefits for working in teams to use Codespace, but since I work most of the time alone in these kind of things, I think if the M1 dbt problem goes away, Codespace might also go away. But right now, it's like it's a standard thing. It's essential. Same for VS Code. Yes, I use this for all coding stuff. At some point, I just started to invest into VS Code, and I mean, this is like, if you know your editor pretty well, then it's pretty unlikely that you move somewhere else. Right now, I also started to use, let's say, note-taking in VS Code with Dendron, which I really like because I spend a lot of time in VS Code, and so like to do this also in VS Code, it's really nice. And so yeah, the challenge that VS Code might go away is pretty low. So I at the moment I cannot really see a scenario why it should be. Activity schema. This is an interesting entry for Essential because it's definitely a risky one. So I use this at the moment for all my model setups where I really start a model out from scratch. So I don't use it yet to really refactor existing models into a new one, but I use it when I now do some new projects where we have to set up a model. And the reason for it is like right now it works really well in these kind of, all the use cases that I did so far are definitely, I'm saving time. I'm definitely saving operational overhead. So because like the activity schema models are pretty simple in the end. So I don't really need dbt for that to orchestrate that. So I still use it because I'm quite familiar with it, but I wouldn't need it. And like operational costs are super low with activity schema. This is really nice. Yeah, and so far it looks really good. So why it's risky? Because like I mean, data model is something so essential, so you usually should put a lot of work and hours into it to really understand like the limitations. And this is like what's still missing. So I still have to put more hours into it to really understand, okay, what are usually like the limits, because everything has limits and I don't know the limits well enough. But still, I would say it's essential for me because this is basically my bet for a future setup. And so maybe it might be a variation of activity schema, or like, let's say, an evolution of activity schema. But I think the direction to do this event-focused modeling approach is definitely something that I will continue to do. So yeah, so these are my essentials. Maybe use some, maybe not. So let me know in the comments what you like, what you don't like, what you use as your essential. That would be super helpful because then maybe I can test out something. Let's move on to road to essential. Road to essential basically means, okay, these are products and tools that I use right now quite often, but I would not classify them essential, and I explain why. So let's start out, Lightdash. I use Lightdash as my main reporting tool at the moment. And why I'm doing this, because it has a metric layer built in. And I can just define the metrics layer in dbt in the format that Lightdash is expecting. And then once it's done, I can just sync up my dbt model into Lightdash, and I have all the metrics and dimensions that I need to build. So this reduces my time to build some kind of reporting pretty extensively, and so it's really quick to do this stuff, and this is good for me because I hate to build reporting. So, and I know that Lightdash at least works a little bit on config as code, and so this is something which I would really welcome when it comes available, because then I can just build some configurations and just push them and can get reports out of the box even quicker. This is what I really like. Why it's not essential: user experience and design. So Lightdash is pretty basic when it comes to UX, and even more basic when it comes to design. And I like beautiful charts to some degree. And this is still the thing that let me think, maybe I should use something else. It's also like the reason why I don't use it extensively in client projects, because like of the missing UX and the missing design, because like I know that when I give this to a marketing team, they will not be happy. I think for developers, it's fine because they more see the data use case behind it. But there are also like developers who are very design focused, so shouldn't exclude that. And so this is like at the moment, which is like, doesn't make it essential for me. Presets, so same category, also like for BI and report generation. I use this a lot in client projects. So because like the visual appearance is definitely good enough for these kind of things. And so at least like my clients like it. And so I let them also like, I showed them different charts of different kind of things, and usually they quite often pick preset. It's quite interesting. And so I use it there, and it works really well enough. So why it's not essential? Because it's missing the metrics layer. We come to a point where how you can work with that. And it sometimes still has some annoying edge cases. So for example, in one project, we were still like row level security, which is a really great principle, is also available, but then it has some quirks where it's not really working out of the box. And so, yeah, and I still have to rethink how I do this. And so this at the moment really holds me a little bit back to say, okay, this is an essential one. Next one, Posthog. Definitely interesting case. So at the moment, I use this for either product analytics, so as an alternative to Amplitude, or I experiment a little bit with using it as a CDP, so basically replacing segment. But still, this is experimentation phase. So why it's not essential? First of all, like the funnel and cohort is not so deep as it is in Amplitude. I cannot do all the different kind of funky things that I can do in Amplitude. And since I sometimes really do funky things, this is definitely a blocker for me. But I think for basic things, it's great. And I definitely need more time to deep dive. So especially for the CDP case, I really have to create a full-blown experimentational setup to really see what are the limitations. So because like Posthog itself is not like, it doesn't really work completely like segment, but you can make it work like segment. But the can make it work is something I have to try out. So how much effort it really is, how much problems it can give. It's on my list of things that I want to try out, but there are other things too. So let's see. Well, still, I really like the product. Same with Snowplow. Snowplow, I really love. I love the technology. I mean, people know that I already did some videos about Snowplow. So Snowplow use case is like also could be a CDP use case, but mostly like event pipeline. Why it's not essential, the setup. So if you don't use their platform, and the platform is just a use case for enterprise because like the price point is pretty extensive. So if I would use the open source thing, usually the setup takes time and it never really works out without flaws. So in every project that I did, we always have some things where we have to tinker around for at least 1 or 2 days. And this is a little bit annoying. I mean, when everything is set up, it works pretty straightforward. So you usually don't really have a lot of maintenance stuff to do. But getting there, and it's annoying. I think I'm always a little bit angry because the product is really great, and if they would make it easier to set it up, it would be great. But of course, I also understand that it terminates a little bit basically their revenue model in the end. And so I don't know. But we might come a little bit more to this problems with open source and paid product later down. Walker.js is a open source project by AppWalker, and so this is basically a script that I can run on front ends and can make the tracking implementation a lot easier. And so I did already like when I do basic marketing website stuff, I always use it because there it's really straightforward to just add the kind of event that I want to track just within HTML attributes. And so this is so quick and straightforward that I don't really have to think about, especially like when you work with static website generators like Next.js, where it's always like, especially Next.js, where it's not super straightforward to implement some kind of tracking because some stuff runs on the front end, some stuff just gets generated on the server side. So you always have to jump through some loops to get everything up and running. And so with Walker.js, it's super straightforward to do this. And so, this is why it's definitely on the road to essential. Why it's not essential? Because it's just for front ends. And so I don't do so many front end stuff anymore. So when comes front end, definitely always on the list. All right, moving on. Testing. This is stuff that I currently just test. And what means testing? So different degrees. So some things I test intensively because I'm planning to introduce them in a more important role. For example, for specific kind of client projects that I'm working on or plan to work, or sometimes for some architecture things that I want to change. And so I'm testing on. Some things are more, let's say, irregular testing. So I start a little bit, then I pause and I start. And so it's not something which is so important for me, but I like the approach, I like the product, and I want to try it out a little bit. And so let's go through it. Kibula, definitely something that at the moment is in the test lab because what I already said about GCP is like, I always looked for a, let's say, data platform layer that gives me all this meta layer and all the operational layer. And Kibula at the moment looks like these kind of platforms. So I get all these things. I get a lot of orchestration. I get all the data integration as well. So really interesting data integration functions and possibilities. And they abstract some things that I usually had to build myself. And so I like how they do it. So the platform is still open. I mean, it's not like it's not a closed platform that I do everything in Kibula. So it's just like they put a layer on top and I can still do things on the side. So this is definitely super interesting. And they also have a great team. So I had so many great chats already with people from Kibula, especially like with Martin. And at the moment, really strong contender to move up the line. RudderStack. So this is like an on-off thing. So I still test out RudderStack. I also implemented it in client projects already. And I think it's definitely a good product. But so I struggle with 2 things. First thing is like, I don't really get their open source strategy. For me, from the outside, and RudderStack people, please correct me. I mean, they might correct me. It still looks for me like a marketing thing. So because you already can see the gap pretty wide open between what they do for open source and what they do for the hosted version. And honestly, I don't like it. I know that it's hard to figure out how to handle open source, how to handle, how to earn money in these kind of things. But the way how RudderStack is doing it doesn't really give me a good gut feeling. This is one thing. And I know from 1 or 2 implementations, it's not so flawless and seamless like it is Segment. So you have to do a little bit more. And it doesn't have all the functionality yet that Segment has. But I mean, they're catching up. One of the big benefits of Rudderstack is like they're investing heavily in product development. So they're coming out with new stuff all the time. So it's maybe just a matter of time. Maybe give them a year or 2 years and then let's see where they are. So pricing, it's definitely, especially for some use cases, it's definitely better because like Rudderstack is not billing for users, it's billing for events. And so especially when you have parts of your setup, so for example, you are really good in content marketing, get a lot of traffic there, but this is often like traffic where people just watch or look 1 or 2 pages, and so you maybe send 2 or 4 events, so low event per user rate. So in Segment, you will always pay more because you pay for the user. And in Rudderstack, you would pay less because you pay for the events. And so I would still use it in client projects if it really fits. So also testing Snowflake. Snowflake is just connected to Kibula. Kibula works, I think, also with BigQuery, but it works really natively with Snowflake. And so I have to start to do a little bit more in Snowflake, mostly through Kibula, but also a little bit direct. It's not really like a testing case, it's more like an adjacent testing case. Hex. Hex is a SQL notebook solution. I really love the design. So when I saw it for the first time, I really fell in love, and I still are. So I really love how they visualize the notebooks. And I'm testing right now if I can use notebooks for reporting. So in special kind of projects to have a different kind of approach to do reporting, which I think can work. And I think Hex could be interesting because it really looks like a high level thing. And so this is also like good for a specific kind of client projects. Zing Data, I think they call themselves, just discovered 1 or 2 weeks ago. And the major reason is like, I have some stuff that I want to see on the go. So I have some things. So if I, for example, publish some YouTube stuff, of course, I'm super curious how what kind of numbers it generates. And so I would like to have a mobile BI application. And Zing looks really interesting. So, but it's really early on. So I have to test out a lot more. So I think created 1 or 2 sample charts. But so far, I quite like it. Also, I like that they took the approach that you can really build your charts on the mobile device. So usually like the other implementation were just like you had a mobile view-able layer within a mobile app, but you had to build everything on desktop. And I like it that they try that you can really build things on mobile. It's interesting how they approach it. So, and it's quite straightforward. So I built like 2 essential charts within 5 to 10 minutes. So it's not something that you need a lot of learning. So interesting. Let's see how far it gets me. Cube.js. I like the metrics layer in Lightdash a lot, I already said, but I'm not so happy with the visualization. So I'm at the moment looking a little bit, especially like for client projects, I'm looking a little bit like of a combination of to do the metrics layer somewhere else and then use a more, let's say, stronger visualization tool on top of the metrics layer. And Cube.js is something I'm following, I think, for most of their time they were there. So I think they even started out, as far as I can really remember, as a Slack analytics tool. I hope I get this right. And at some point they ventured on, I think then they started to work on Cube.js, and I always checked it in. Also tried it a little bit in the past, but now like, now since the metrics layer becomes more important for me, it's definitely something that I want to try out. Also, for projects where we might build some data products, where we really like make really custom application, on top of the data. And then I can really see Cube.js as a really essential ingredient there. And they also work with Retool. And so this is something I want to try out as well, also for the data products. Transform, or their open source project, Metric Flow, same thing. So I'm testing out it for the metrics layer to figure it out. So I spent quite some time to get everything up and running, but now, since I'm in the part to define the metrics, this is quite straightforward, but I have to test it out how it works then with other tools. So I know that it natively integrates pretty well with some well-known tools like Mode Analytics, Tableau, and so on, but I don't use them at the moment. So let's see. It's really testing. Elementary is super interesting thing. So it's also on my testing workbench. My first use case is like I want to use it as a, let's say, operational monitoring tool to see how models on DBT are developing over time. So how many do we have, how the run times are, and so on. So this is something that at least in like bigger setups, super helpful. And I'm really missing that from DBT. And so Elementary puts this on top. It's also like an open source project, and but I really have to invest a little bit more time because I know they can do a lot more stuff, and right now I'm just scratching a little bit on the surface, but I want to do more. Cypress.io, I have a test set up, for example, where I test consent right now. So for myself, and also like we'll introduce this for clients as well, so that we basically run end-to-end browser test and check if the consent is working how we want it. So like it checks if the consent is showing up, if it has all the options. So because I also had a client where one of the people in their team just removed the decline all option because they thought it's not so good looking. And I mean, legally it can basically introduce a risk, and so I want to have some testing on top. So it tests this, and it tests basically like when I click deny all or whatever, that it then tests that it doesn't send any kind of request to my defined network request URLs that I put in. And so at the moment, so I have a first setup ready. I just have to productize it now for myself. So I just will put it on a daily watch, and then let's see if it works really nicely. Then it quickly can become an essential part. Because like it's super helpful. I love to have tests that I don't have to think about things and they just tell me, okay, something is not working. All right, what I have on my list, so this is like the last one, we do it really quick. So this might come into my test workbench, I don't know, in the next 2-3 months. Pivot Pro, I still want to test it out. I mean, I read a lot about it. I heard a lot of people talking about it. It's not super pressing because I don't do a lot of projects in this space where people really look for a GA alternative, but I still really want to know because I read and heard really good stuff, and so really want to know what's working on. I think Metaplane is more likely to become on the test workbench more quickly because I talked to some people there and really had good talks there, and also I really looking for, let's say, a very lean layer on at least like get a first test on event data coming in, because this is often like an issue to do this. So I have tests for evaluation, so for like schema validation and so on, but yeah, so I want to have something which is also working on the data. DuckDB, because everyone is talking about it, so I at least want to see how it works. Thing is something that's also longer, already on my list that I want to test. So they have, it's basically they also have an open source project, and it's for identity management, so identity stitching, so identifying similar accounts and so on, which in most of the projects is some kind of problems. I mean, it depends, the size depends on the size of the company and their kind of business model. But I mean, identity management is always a problem when CRM data is involved. And so I want to try them out because it looks really cool. And I forgot something in Essential Row. I just recognized it. So Stefania, this is especially a big excuse me. So I forgot, and then we just added here as well, I forgot Arvo. Which is ridiculous because I basically use Arvo in all my projects that I do with clients. And so how do I use it? So I basically, I create some kind of first wireframe of a tracking plan. I usually do this in Miro. And then at some point when I say, okay, we really want to work with it, I move it to Arvo. And so it's basically my tracking plan management tool. And it's not even that, it's also like my tracking plan testing tool. Because when I have the tracking plan in Arvo, and for example, I use Segment, then I can really easily set up a destination function in Segment that sends just the schema data, not your data really, just sampled down schema data, so how the events look like from a schema base, sends it back to Arvo, and in Arvo I have an automatic monitoring on top of like my tracking implementation. And this is really great because like I can see there if defined events come in some right shapes or in wrong shapes, I can see that. And one feature which is really great, I can also see events that come in that we don't have defined in my tracking plan. I think this is like usually the things where tracking setups can become worse and worse, is like when product and development are introducing tracking events and they don't put it in a tracking plan. And this is something I see immediately in Arvo there. So I see a list of, hey, we received this kind of event, but it's not any kind of plan. So maybe you just want to add it, or maybe it's a mistake or whatever. So I can act on that. And this is really great. And this is like, why I really love to do it. And so it's really like for data quality and also like to really, collaborate on tracking schema, because like if I do this on a Google Sheet and I want to change a property, I might change it in 10 different places because like Google Sheet is flat and I forget it in one, and then everything is, it's not really working well. So what could be a challenge for Arvo that it goes away when I have too many ideas? So I work a lot with schemas, and so I have some ideas with schemas that I really want to achieve. So for example, I want to mark which kind of fields are PII, because this can be interesting downstream to know this. I might to work more with code samples, because like, I mean, in Arvo I can generate SDKs, but maybe the team won't work with SDKs, but I need code samples. And so what I recognize by myself is like in these kind of things, I start to build basically a very low version of Arvo on the side myself to do these kind of things. I think this is just me. I work, this is my major job. And so I might need more features. And so I can just put in that if I really have more and more the need for these kind of features, and of course Arvo is not building it because then they just build the tool for me. That doesn't make sense, and it's not really sustainable business. Then I might still would use Arvo as some kind of layer in that, but then it would be not like the single source for my events things that would lie somewhere else. But I can definitely see, let's say, a combination of Arvo and something home-baked. So the home-baked thing is then I can use for my special use cases, and Arvo I can still use for the clients, because like for clients, it's especially like when you don't always talk just to tech departments, then it's definitely a good tool. So yeah, that's my tool stack at the moment. So don't get me wrong. So it's not like that I work on all these tools all day, but so I regularly work on that. And so it has high times and low times, depend really like on the things that I'm working on. But yeah, this is like, and as said, so like for client projects, I also work with other tools. I just didn't put them here because like, I mean, then the list would be even longer, and I want to make a focus, or even like when I would choose the full data stack, what I would choose. So yeah, of course I work with Mixpanel, for example, a lot, and so I like it too, but like when I compare with Amplitude, I would go for Amplitude. That's the only thing, but it's not, it's a tight race between the both. Okay, I hope that was insightful, maybe. I might do an update. I don't know when. Let's see. But maybe you find some inspirations. Maybe you like to share some tools that you really like. Just put them in the comments. And if anything else, see you in the next video.